What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing another deck tech featuring the first Sliver, and it's a combo deck, so not a Sliver deck, revolving around Hypergenesis. So we're going to be talking about Cascade, and we're going to be talking about spells like Hypergenesis that allow us to put creatures from our hand into play. So this is going to be a pretty sweet deck. It's a little bit of a glass cannon-y type deck. But I think it's pretty fun to play. I've played it a little bit and I thoroughly enjoy it, and you can get some wins out of nowhere. So first off, let's talk about this deck's strategy is to cascade into specific spells. So Cascade says when you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less, and then you cast it without paying its mana cost. So Cascade gets spells with value less than the card. So Shardless Agent is a 3-cost Cascader, meaning that she can only cascade into spells that cost 2, 1, or 0. Now, if your deck is built with only certain spells less than the Cascaders, you will always cascade into those spells. So if, for instance, all of our spells cost 3 or more mana, except for Hypergenesis, then whenever we play Shardless Agent, we will cascade into Hypergenesis. Same goes with any other specific 0 mana spell like Living End or Crashing Footfalls or Ancestral Visions. If all the cards in your deck are CMC greater than 3 except for your combo piece, your Cascader of CMC 3 will always hit the combo piece. So that's the strategy of the deck. Now, what is our combo piece? Our combo piece is Hypergenesis. Now, we have some other cards in the deck that do similar things to Hypergenesis, but this is what we want to cascade into is Hypergenesis. So Hypergenesis says, starting with you, each player may put an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land card from their hand onto the battlefield. And you repeat this until no one puts a card onto the battlefield. So your deck is going to be designed in a way where you can cascade consistently into Hypergenesis and then put out a lot of big things. Show and Tell does a similar thing, except you only get to put one thing into play. And then Eureka does the same thing as Hypergenesis, except it costs 4 mana. So why are we playing these other things? If we accidentally draw Hypergenesis, we can still hit a Show and Tell in our deck, draw that, or draw Eureka as alternatives if we accidentally draw our Hypergenesis. So what do we put in play from these Hypergenesis and Shows and Tells and Eurekas? Well, we have 3 different categories of things. We have Eldrazi Titans, so this is Kozileks, your Ulamogs, stuff like that. Now you don't get the cast trigger, but you get a big creature that has Annihilator, so that's gonna be pretty good. You have cards that have good ETBs, like Atraxa Grand Unifier, which will draw you tons of cards. And then you have cards with big effects like Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite, which reduces the power of your opponent's creatures if you're playing against a tokens deck or a tribal deck, and then boosts your own power. So these are some examples of sorts of things that we want to put into play with our Hypergenesis. Now, what are some other things that we want to put in play? Here are some of my favorite things to cheat in. Obviously, the deck plays Kozilek and Ulamog. It plays Atraxa. It plays Elesh Norn. It plays actually a lot of decent threats at the high end. You can look at the deck list to see all of those. But we have some other ones that I really like here. Nezahal Primal Tide is 7 mana, so you can reasonably cast this on turn 7, but it's easier to cheat this in. Better to cheat this in. What I like about this is that it says whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, draw a card. So your opponent's going to be casting tons of non-creature spells. You're going to be drawing cards, and then you can discard 3 cards to exile it and return it to the battlefield tap to protect itself. So this is a good way. You cheat this in, you're going to be able to draw lots of cards and get a 7/7 threat into play. Natali Primal Conqueror. When it enters, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until exile non-land card, and you can cast those, so you get a lot of card advantage this way. Agent of Treachery is a cool one because when it enters, you gain control of target permanents. You can gain control of whatever your opponent's best thing is, and then at the beginning of your end step, you control 3 or more permanents you don't own. Draw 3 cards. That's rarely going to happen, but the idea of it coming into play and stealing one of your opponent's best things is really cool. And then we have Vorinclex, which is a really good card in this deck because when you cheat it in, now your mana taps for doubles and your opponent's mana doesn't untap, so now you can easily cast your big threats. So these are some examples of things to cheat in that I really like. But the best things to cheat in, I think, are your Omniscience effects. So Omniscience says you may cast spells from your hand without paying their mana costs. So you're going to be drawing lots of high cost things that you're not necessarily going to be able to get in from your Hypergenesis, or that you'd rather cast. So if you cheat in Omniscience with your Hypergenesis, because you can do that, you can just Omniscience and then just cast everything. One of the multiverse is a similar thing, except it only says once during each of your turns you may cast a spell from your hand or the top of your library without paying its mana cost, so you get one free spell a turn, but that's still pretty damn good. Both these are going to be really good cards to cheat into play off of your Eurekas or your Show and Tells or your Hypergenesises. So you can cast, these work really well with the Eldrazi Titans because they allow you to cast the Eldrazi Titans without paying their mana cost, so you can get the cast triggers. So anyways, this is what we're going to get in with Hypergenesis. What are we going to cascade into Hypergenesis with? Well, we have lots of options, actually. Violent Outburst. We're playing a 5-color deck, so we get all of the best 3-mana Cascaders in all the colors. In Gruul, we get Violent Outburst, which is instant speed Cascade. Pretty darn good. Ardent Plea, it gives your creatures Exalted, but I mean, it's in here for the Cascade. Charlotte's Agent is a 2/2, so that's relevant. It has Cascade. The first Sliver, we have some things in this deck that cost 3 or 4, so you might get Cascade into that, but being your commander, you can repeatedly play it from your command zone to recascade into things and hopefully hit your combo pieces. Some other 3-mana Cascaders. We have Demonic Dread. It requires a creature to be in play, but it's just a 3-mana Cascader. Bloodbraid Elf comes with a 3/2 haste body, so that's pretty nice. Throes of Chaos is a 4-mana Cascader, so it will most likely get one of your combo pieces. The 4-mana Cascaders will get your combo pieces, or will get a 3-mana Cascader, which will then get your combo piece. Throes of Chaos. I mean, the one good thing about this one is that you can retrace it by discarding a land. So if you need to combo off again, and one good thing about this deck is you could throw the Chaos or Bloodbraid Elf into Hypergenesis, but you can also do that into Show and Tell as well. So if you want to go again, you can discard a card and then replay your Throws of Chaos. Emoti, Celebrant of Bounty. Spells you cast with mana value 6 or greater have Cascade. So if you play this and Cascade into Hypergenesis, or you cascade into Bloodbraid Elf, or you cascade into Throes of Chaos, and then eventually cascade into Show and Tell or Hypergenesis, then anytime you cast a big spell later in the game, that's going to cascade. So Emoti is really good in the late game with all of your big threats. So here's some more Cascaders that this deck plays. And then we play Discover cards. So Discover cards do something similar to Cascade. So if something has Discover 3, you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card of mana value 3 or less, and you cast it without paying its mana cost, or put it into your hand. What's really good about this is that you can choose to put the card in your hand. So if you Geological Appraiser, it's a 4-mana thing, and you cascade and Show and Tell, and you don't necessarily want to cast that Show and Tell, you can just put it into your hand and cast it on another turn. Or you cascade into one of your other Cascaders, you don't necessarily have to cast it because it's Discover instead of Cascade. Trumpeting Carnosaur discovers 5, so you might not always get one of your combo pieces, but it's in here because you can discard it to deal 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and it's a decent threat by itself. And then Quintorius Cond, you can repeatedly discover 4 to find your combo pieces to be able to cheat things into play. So this is just Discover cards is another type of thing that does something similar to Cascade. Next, we have some backup plans. So if our Cascade spells or our combo pieces get countered, so if someone counters a Hypergenesis or a Show and Tell or a Eureka, we need other ways to be able to cheat our things into play other than just making enough mana to ramp into it. That's why we have Quicksilver Amulet and Monster Manual will allow us to put creatures from our hand onto the battlefield. Monster Manual is really good because we can also use the Zoological Study to return a creature card milled from our graveyard to our hand so that we can have something to put into play. Quicksilver Amulet's a little more expensive than Monster Manual, but they're both really good cards. Court of Bounty is a really good card because it makes us the Monarch. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, we get to put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield, so that allows us to ramp. But if we're the Monarch, we instead may put a creature or land from our hand on the battlefield. So if we're able to retain the Monarchy, we can draw cards and then cheat creatures into play with Court of Bounty. I think that's really sweet. And then Sneak Attack is just a classic one. You pay 4 mana, you pay a red, put a creature into play, it gets haste. This is really good with Eldrazi Titans because they have Annihilate or anything good with ETB triggers. They do sacrifice at the beginning of the next instep, but being able to cheat those creatures into play for 1 turn sometimes is enough, especially if it's something of a good ETB like Attract to draw cards, or something like a Tali, or if it has Annihilator like an Eldrazi Titan. We're going to talk about the backup plans, but there's one big problem in the deck. Since we're playing no spells with CMC between 1 and 3, it's going to be very hard to draw cards, ramp, and interact with our opponent. We must play Channel, Adventure, and Split cards to interact, yet still be able to Cascade and Hypergenesis. Rafts are very good against us, and drawing Hypergenesis is bad, which is why we play Eureka and Show and Tell and our backups so that we are not as glass cannony, even though we're still a very glass cannon deck. So ramp, the Careful Cultivation's a weird card because our first Sliver and our 4 mana things can cascade into it, but it's one of the few ways to ramp, so I thought it would be worthwhile to put into this deck. It might not be. We'll see. It does allow us to brick off of our Cascade, but it's still a way to ramp for 2 mana, which is pretty strong. Greater Tanuki, we can channel it for 3 mana to search for basic land cards. Fertile Footsteps off Beanstalk Giant searches for a land, and then we can get a Beanstalk Giant later, which is a decent threat. And then Search for Tomorrow, we can suspend it on turn 1 or just play it for 3 mana. These aren't great ramp spells, but it's the options we have available to us. I actually think Search for Tomorrow is not that bad, but it's only really that good if you can get it off turn 1 suspended. Next, we have Interaction for creatures. So we don't get to play a lot of cheap interaction because our deck has that stipulation where we can't play many 1 or 2 CMC things. So we can Cascade and Hypergenesis. So we have to play other things instead. Snuff Out's a great card. We get to destroy target non-black creature for basically free if we control a swamp. So that's pretty sweet. Murderous Cut is 5 mana, but we can cast it for 1 mana if we dub away things like fetch lands and spells from our graveyard. Shriek Maw is 2 mana to destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature. It does go in the graveyard, but 2 mana to do that's pretty good. At sorcery speed, though, Shriek Maw is a pretty good card, and it doesn't really see enough play, but because the stipulations are our deck, we have to play it. We have more interaction. We have Solitude, so this is a 5 mana. We can cast it for free, exiling a white card from our hand. It's also a really good thing to cheat into play with a Show and Tell or a Hypergenesis to exile our opponent's things they cheat into play. Leyline Binding can exile target non-land permanent, and since we're playing a 5-color deck, we can get that cost to 1 or 2 mana. And Touch the Spirit Realm is a really versatile card. We can use it as a 3 mana way to exile a creature or artifact, or we can pay 2 mana to blink something like an Eldrazi Titan to save it from removal, save it from a sneak attack trigger, or retrigger an ETB for something like Atraxa. So it's a very versatile card in that way. Next, we have interaction for artifacts and enchantments. Force of Vigor is one of the best cards to interact with artifacts and enchantments. We can cast it for free, but also just 4 mana to destroy 2 artifacts and enchantments. Pretty strong. Kogla Yadaro is a threat by itself, but for 4 mana, we can discard it to destroy an artifact or enchantment and draw a card. It's pretty sweet. And then Foundation Breaker, we can evoke for 2 mana, or just play it as a 2/2 for 4. All of these are ways to interact with artifacts and enchantments that are pretty cheap or free and are good on rate, but allow us to Cascade into Hypergenesis. Kogla Yadaro is actually a really sweet card. I think should see more play. It's similar to Boseiju in that you're not casting a spell, so if your opponent has something like a Teferi out or something that prevents you from casting spells on their turn, you can still use this to destroy artifacts and enchantments. Things like Trinisphere, this gets around, is pretty good. Things like Damping Sphere, so there's a lot of hate cards that Kogla Yadaro is very good against, similar to Boseiju. Boseiju also should be in this deck too. Next, we're talking about sweepers. So, we don't want to give our opponent too many threats, so that way we can end the game when we play our big threats off of our Hypergenesis, and we can clear off threats that come in the early game. So a lot of times we're not going to combo off until turn 4, turn 5, and our opponents are going to be able to develop boards, so we need a way to remove those creatures. Coward Killer. So these work that they're CMC 6 combined, so we'll never cascade into them. But Killer deals 3 damage to target creature, and each other creature shares creature type with it. It's very good against tribal decks or tokens decks. Gallifrey Falls deals 4 damage to each creature. Creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile instead. A really good sweeper. Punishment destroys each artifact, creature, and enchantment of CMC X. So you can use this to selectively destroy tokens, destroy certain artifacts in the play and stuff. All these cards are pretty niche. Cast Off from Realm Cloak Giant, though, is pretty good. Destroys all non-giant creatures. So that's a pretty good card. Yeah, it's a pretty good sweeper, and it's one of the few ones that we can actually play. We could play something like Wrath of God, but the thing is we don't want to cascade from our first Sliver into a Wrath of God. Blasphemous Act is actually a good one in this deck. We can play that and kill all of our opponent's creatures, because that costs like 9 mana, so we're never going to cascade into that. So Blasphemous Act should be on this slide. But I thought these would be interesting to show you. Yeah, I wouldn't play things like Wrath of God or Toxic Deluge because you don't want to cascade into those. But something like, Gallifrey Falls you can keep in your hand. You never cascade into this. Cast Off is a decent option. And then it comes with a body too. Next, we have card draw. So, Mole Drifter is a good one because you can evoke this for 3 mana to draw 2 cards. You can also cheat this into play to draw 2 cards, and we have ways to flicker it, which is nice. Omnath comes in, draws us a card, but we have this landfall trigger that gives us a lot of value. So, whenever our first land comes in, we gain 4 life. When our second land comes in, we add mana. And then the third time, we deal 4 damage to each opponent. So that's going to be pretty sweet. We already talked about Court of Bounty, getting us the Monarchy and allowing us to cheat things into play. Another good card is Bonehorde Dracosaur. So what this does is we can exile the top 2 cards of the library and we can play them. So this basically gives us 2 cards a turn and gives us value in the form of dinosaur tokens and treasures. So this card's really, really good. All these cards are going to give us a lot of value. And one thing about Omnath and Bonehorde Dracosaur is we can play these on turn 4, turn 5 as we await our combo, or as something to bridge us over till we get enough mana to play our big threats. Chroma's Will gives our creatures lifelink indestructible protection from all colors, or it can be an easy way to end the game. I don't know if this is really that great in this deck because the first Sliver can cascade into it. And it is a 4 mana play, so Discover 4 can get it. So I don't know, it might not be the best thing in this deck, but it is a really good way of protecting our stuff, and potentially for free if we have something like First Sliver into play. Or actually, no, this is not the free one. I'm sorry. We can protect our things or kill our opponents if we have our commander in play. Ready, creatures you control are indestructible. Untap each creature you control. And it's a decent option to protect us from sweepers. And then No More lets our creatures phase out. It's a decent option. Our idea is to play creatures and just protect them from sweepers. And then we have options like this. Some other ideas for protection from sweepers are like Rootborn defenses. The thing is, you don't want to cascade into those. Teferi's Protection probably should be in the deck because it should be in every deck, but the problem is you might cascade into that with something like your Bloodbraid Elf or your first Sliver, so it's not going to be that great, but it might be worth it to play in this deck. Next, I have sort of another backup plan, and it's the idea of playing big mana rocks so that we can be able to eventually hard cast our big threat. So something like a Gilded Lotus on turn 5 gets us to 9 mana the next turn. Timeless Lotus is a really good one. You play it, and then the next turn you get 5 extra mana. Chromatic Orrery can add us mana and then draw us insane amounts of cards. So all these big mana rocks, I think, are going to be interesting ways if the game goes late to be able to allow us to just free cast our hard cast our Eldrazi rather than relying on our Hypergenesis or something, or relying on something like a Sneak Attack or a Quicksilver Amulet. So this is another option we have as a alternative to our combo. And then lastly, do we play other Suspend spells? So I was thinking about playing Inevitable Betrayal because this card is sweet, and we can cascade consistently into Inevitable Betrayal, which allows us to search target opponent's library for a creature and put a card onto the battlefield under your control. Or Ancestral Vision to draw us 3 cards. These cards are insane if we're able to cascade into them. The pros is this gives us a cascade target if we draw our Hypergenesis, but it reduces the consistency of our combo. It's up to you whether you want to play these in your deck. I've tried it with these, and I've tried it without. I think it's more fun with Inevitable Betrayal. Specifically, I think this deck is more fun if you play one of Inevitable Betrayal because it allows us to steal whatever our opponent's best things are, and that's just a fun effect. Ancestral Vision is not that fun, but Inevitable Betrayal is really fun. It does make us a little bit worse, but I still think it's really fun. It really sucks when you cascade and you have like Iona, or not Iona, you have like Atraxa and Kozilek in your hand, and instead of getting Hypergenesis, you get Betrayal. But, you know, we have so many Cascaders, it's not really that big of a deal. However, it does reduce the consistency of our combo. It's up to you whether you want to play these, although I personally would play Inevitable Betrayal, but not Ancestral Vision. And then there's another few options, like Restore Balance, which are interesting, but I don't like those for this deck. Anyways, this is the deck tech. I hope you like this deck. I hope you found this deck interesting, and we'll have some gameplay of this deck later on, and I hope you watch that. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.